So today we're going to start a new series on the 3 I's of EQ. The 3 I's of EQ, we're talking about identify, illustrate, and implement. So that's what we're going to be covering in this next 6-part series. The 3 I's of EQ: identify, illustrate, and implement. So the first 3, we're going to talk about the 5 components of EQ. There are 5 different components to EQ. Then we're going to talk about 2 ways to better visualize how to use it. Then we're going to talk about 3 action items and how you can implement it for you and your business and really get the most out of what you've learned and most out of learning about emotional intelligence. So the very first one we're going to cover today is self-awareness. And we're going to be doing these in order. So the 5 components of emotional intelligence are self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, social awareness, and social regulation. And we're going to weave it in a pattern to where one leads into the other. If you have one, you have to have, and they're building blocks. And so that's how we're going to kind of approach this today. So Tom, talk a little bit about self-awareness and really why is it important, and what people can hope to learn from the series, the 3 I's of EQ.
Well, Dave, once again, when we start to talk about emotional intelligence, we're talking about that iceberg. And the iceberg that's you can see above the water, those are things like behaviors. But when you start to get into below the surface, now we're talking about emotional quotient. So when we talk about self-awareness, yes, we've got to know ourselves, understand ourselves, and just what is it that we're able to process in our brains when it comes to being emotionally aware, at least in terms of ourselves. Our own emotions. So this is critical, because if we don't understand ourselves, how can we expect to understand other people? So that's one of the first things we want to look at.
It's very true. And that's one of the reasons they go in order. From self-awareness to then self-regulation to then motivation and then social awareness and then finally social regulation. Mm-hmm. So like today, we're going to start at the very beginning and talk about self-awareness.
Yes.
So one of the things that I looked at is if you're not aware of your emotions and how they impact others and the other emotional intelligence skills that we talked about, they're kind of difficult. I mean, if you really are not aware of yourself and how your emotions impact you, how are you going to regulate them if you're not even aware of them?
David, I guess a good way to look at this is what are some of the triggers we have inside of us? So let's say, for instance, you're a leader of your organization, you're in a meeting, somebody says something, and all of a sudden you get very defensive. So there's some kind of an emotional charge that has been brought up within your own brain, and now you're reacting. See, if you're not aware, you're reacting at that point of how you're coming across to these individuals. And if you're like most companies that are out there, when the person that's in charge speaks, most people will not question or will not want to intimidate or stop that individual from their emotional expression, which might be pretty negative.
Right. And you're right. When you talk about triggers, if you're just not aware of how your emotions and you're reacting to them, it's virtually impossible to regulate them. We talked about this on a previous podcast, a great book from Marshall Goldsmith, and I would recommend it to anybody. It's called Triggers. And it's very similar to Martin Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit. It just looks at things in different ways. What they're looking at, Marshall Goldsmith talks about in his book, Triggers, is there's always some kind of, well, obviously a trigger, hence the name of the book, but then that's the emotion. And then there's this basically a split-second reaction. And what becoming aware, this ties into the self-awareness, what Dr. Goldsmith is talking about is if you can become aware of that trigger, it's not going to make it go away. It's not going to make you any less angry. It's not going to make you any less want to, choke somebody when they're making you mad or whatever, kind of whatever you want to do. What it does is it buys you space. Just that instant of time that you're aware of it, split second, half second, full second, just that little bit of time that now you're aware, guess what? Instead of immediately reacting, that little bit of time buys you some space for your prefrontal cortex to step in and be like, hey, stop. I want to choose how I react to this. I still might get upset, heart still might race, blood pressure might get up, still might get red in the face, but at least I can make a conscious decision that I want to do something different and not just immediately react emotionally.
Exactly. And Dave, in some cases, it could be a perfect opportunity for that individual to apologize for maybe overreacting and being able to just get a grip on themselves and be able to be transparent. And people want to know that you've got feelings and that you're trying to do the best for everybody that's involved, and to stop and be honest with that person. Say, I'm sorry if I overreacted to that statement that you just made. So that's a form of emotional intelligence.
Right. And like I said, and even better if you can get to the point where, especially when it goes into the self-regulation, if you can identify it, you're aware of it, and you have that just enough of a space where you
Yes,
don't overreact.
exactly.